Let's get started. So today's webinar is going to be on a topic which is very important for every business analyst on modeling the requirements. And we're going to touch upon the some of the modeling techniques, but primarily with the help of an example so that you understand how requirements are modeled and what happens if you don't do it correctly. So we'll take a couple of examples to help you understand that. Just an intro to Techcanvass. So Techcanvass is a PMI and IIBA education partner, and through them we offer PMP and all the IIBA certification courses. We also offer domain certification courses and a few courses on Agile Business Analyst and Product Owner. About myself, I have spent close to 27 years in the industry. I have worked as business analyst and also into project management. Right now, I'm an author. I go for guest lectures, and also I'm a trainer on business analysis. So, what's on the agenda? So, we'll start by looking at what are different variations of requirements. What are the reasons for inaccurate requirements? We'll take a couple of examples. Then I'll sum it up for you, and then we'll have Q&A session. You can type in your questions in between also, but just put it in the chat window so that the flow is not interrupted. I will take up all the questions at the end of the session. All right, so let's get started. So this is a chart which basically summarizes the findings of various agencies, including Project Management Institute, Standish Group, KPMG, and several other organizations also who have conducted surveys on the success and failures of projects. They found these reasons as to why projects succeed or why projects fail. This particular chart provides the top reasons as to why projects fail. If you look at the chart, the second point is inaccurate requirements. And that has been common in almost all the surveys. The percentages may change, but this has always been one of the top reasons for the failure of the projects. Now, as you can understand, once you get the requirements wrong, no matter how well your team is, how strong your technical solution is, it will never be addressing the requirements which the customer wants to address, right? Because you've got it wrong. So whatever happens later is also wrong. And fixing that has been one of the major challenges, because of which there's a lot of rework, and that leads to increase in the cost, increase in the timeline, and overall customer dissatisfaction. So as a business analyst, we need to be very sure that when we are gathering requirements, we make sure that whatever we are gathering and documenting is accurate. And as much as possible, there are no mistakes. So how do we do that? So let's first start to understand the types of requirements, because requirements takes various forms. When you start talking to the customer, when they start the project, they have something in mind. They want to achieve certain goals, certain objectives, and that is why they're investing in the project. So the key objectives, the key goal are known as business requirements, which is coming from the business or which is important for the business. Then as a business analyst, you start talking to the stakeholders to understand what are the requirements of these individuals in the customer organization. Those are known as Stakeholder requirements. So there will be individual requirements coming from the stakeholders. But then you need to remember that these requirements are not good enough for the technical team to develop a software. So what you do as a business analyst, you convert the stakeholder requirements into a set of requirements which are known as system requirements. In IIBA terms, it is known as solution requirements. But essentially, these are the functional and non-functional requirements of a software. Then there is another type of requirements called transition requirements, which are basically one-time requirements, but also gathered during the period of requirements gathering. Now, having understood this context, so remember the difference between business requirements and the system requirements. Because majority of the inaccuracies comes when we are translating or converting business requirements into system requirements. Let's see how. So we'll take two examples to understand. But before that, what are the key problem areas? Why the inaccuracies come in the requirement? Okay, so there are four reasons. One, the stakeholders are not prepared, meaning the stakeholders are not trained enough to tell them why we are coming to you, what do we expect during the requirements gathering meeting. Unless they are told and they are equipped enough, they will not be able to give you all the proper details. Many a times, this has been one of the problems of getting incorrect requirements or insufficient requirements. Next is lack of domain knowledge. As a business analyst, we need to understand certain business terms, processes related to the customer's area of work. Third is inadequate or incorrect requirements analysis and modeling. This is what I'm going to discuss in today's webinar. The other reasons, maybe I will take some other webinar on those topics. So, requirements analysis and modeling helps to find out missing requirements, if requirements are unnecessary, which has been captured but not required to be developed. It can lead to many gaps in the requirements, and that step of analysis and modeling is extremely critical. We'll come to that in a while. The last reason is lack of review. There should always be somebody who can check what have you written or what have you understood, because that will lead to finding of inaccuracies, inconsistencies, and any other type of issues which can be detected at the stage where it should be. But if it leaks and it is detected at the stage when the customer is testing the software, the cost of fixing that defect is so high that it leads to failure of the project. So what we are going to do is we are going to look at the requirements analysis and modeling with the help of two examples. I'm picking up simple example, that is because it's a short webinar and we can't take a full-fledged business application to explain. Let's start with a simple business requirement. The requirement is only authorized users can log in into the system and access the banking services. So you are developing a software and you are talking to the customer. Customer, out of all the requirements, this is one of the requirements which is coming from the customer. Okay. Now, the question is, how do you address this requirement? What will you develop to address this requirement? Who can answer this? Let me simplify the question. what kind of screen will you develop to address this need or address this business requirement? Yeah, so yes, Shada, we need to look at many things, but right now we are just focusing on this part as to what kind of screen will you create in the system to address this problem. Correct. So login screen, login authentication. Okay, so let me show you an example of a login screen. This is a login screen, a sample login screen with user ID, password, remember user ID, and login. Right? Do you think this is a good one? This is going to address the requirement of the customer? What do you think? Okay, you're saying sign up. Anything else which is missing from here?
Image or something which you click, which only the authorized user who has set during the initial login, during the initial account setup. Only when you click on that, then probably it should allow you to log in into the system. So basically, an authorization, a way of authorizing.
So that can be done by using user ID and password, right?
No, no, no. What I mean to say is, like, suppose, for example, in most of the banking sites in India, so when you enter only your username and password, sometimes now they also have an additional security feature where they say you click on a catchphrase or you click on an image which you have set initially.
Correct. Okay.
So
Correct.
that is like an only authorized user only who knows will do that, right? Not everybody will know that, right?
Correct. So every bank does it, or only few banks do it?
I think most of the banks now have done it. Like if you see, if you go to HDFC, they have that. If you go to ICICI, they will have some passcode where you have to enter only through mobile. You cannot directly use your keypad.
Correct.
So it
So
again
there is
depends, right? Bank to bank, it may differ.
correct. Correct. So hold that thought. We'll come to that thought. So CAPTCHA is there, OTP is there. So there are various ways in which a customer, which is a bank in this case, may want to implement this. I'll show you some examples. This is for ICICI Bank or one bank in India where it allows you to log in through user ID as well as mobile number. Okay, there are different ways in which you can log in. So you can choose to log in through mobile number. So then mobile number is authenticated, an ATM pin is to be entered, and then an OTP is entered. Or you can directly enter your user ID and password, and then you can. Now, this is HSBC, where you're entering username and you are entering the security code which appears in a device which HSBC gives it to a customer. Right? So it's a simple user authentication screen which can take so many different ways in which it can be done. Now, what does it indicate to you? What does it mean? Is it only one way of doing certain things in a system, or there could be many different ways, like Chetan was mentioning? It depends from one customer to another customer. So, how do you figure that out? You can figure this out by using a simple modeling technique called prototype. Now, if you look back and start seeing these screens, prototyping is a simple technique where you create the sample screens with the possible placements of fields and take it to the customer and ask, is it okay, or do you want something else to be done? Now, it's very easy for a customer to look at this visual and say, is it okay? It's not okay. Let's do something different, or we don't do it this way. So, prototyping is one of the simplest ways in which we can work with the stakeholders to finalize what should be the requirements and avoid all kinds of mistakes in the system. That's one requirements modeling technique which can be used. Now, there are various tools. Uh, I request everyone to be on mute, please. There's some background noise. Yeah, thank you. There are several tools which are available for prototype. Balsamic is the most popular commercial tool. Pencil is a tool which is a free open source tool. You can use it. This is a quite powerful tool. But prototype can also be done in two different ways. One is a simple throw away prototype, and one is something which can be used in the system. So Balsamic and Pencil allow you to create prototypes quickly. As a business analyst, you can use it to create prototypes. But if you want something which is very exactly similar to a web page or a website, then you need to use tools like Java and ASP. And quite obviously, in these cases, you need to take help from a program. Okay, so prototyping is a tool which can be, or a technique which can be used very early on in the system requirements gathering, or a little late after you have done some other forms of modeling, which we see later. Okay, there is no formula here saying that we have to use prototyping very early on or late. It depends on the complexity of the system. If the system is such that there are many variations or many options available, like in a banking system, authentication is critical. That's why I picked up this example, because there are a lot of variations. We go from one bank to another bank and we see every bank has a different way of allowing people to log. Okay, so it's very easy to use prototype to finalize the system requirements directly from the business. So this is one way of modeling your requirements to avoid missing out on requirements or capturing requirements inaccurate. Let's take another example. In this case, we are talking about an ERP system where the project proposals. So there's an organization which offers services to its customers. So customers ask for the services and they submit proposal. Okay, so this is part of a big system which is an ERP system. What we are talking about is one small part of that requirement, where it says the project proposals are prepared by the sales manager and the pricing in the proposal must be approved before it is sent to the customer. So there is proposal which is created by a sales manager. In the proposal, we have a pricing section which needs to be approved, and then after it is approved, then the proposal is sent to the customer. Okay, that's the requirement. Now, in this case, we'll go in a little more formal way so that we also look at two other requirements modeling techniques. So, we'll start by looking at use cases. So, use cases and user stories are two of the models which are used to capture requirements very early on in the system. Okay, so use cases are very simple way of capturing requirements. Now, here in this case, if you look at the use cases, there is a sales manager who creates a proposal, who sends for approval, and then sends to the customer. Then there is an approver who approves the price, right? So this is another requirement modeling technique which is known as use cases. So there are two parts to use cases. There is an actor who performs the task, and then there are tasks. So we create this kind of a model to just highlight the key functionalities or the requirements of the system. Okay, so step one, we have created the use case. Now we go to step two, where we are now saying, let's talk about how will this approval happen. Okay, so what do you think is the simple process which the company will follow to approve the proposal? We have seen the diagram, but forget about that. Just use your common knowledge to tell me step number one of this process. What will happen first?
The proposal is created.
Correct. So proposal is created. Correct. What is the second one?
Route to the approver.
Correct. So send to approver. Correct. Submit for approval. That's the second step. Then what?
Review, right? The proposal gets reviewed.
Okay. So that's the approval part. So reviewed and approved. Then correct. So that review and approval is the pricing part. Whosoever is their approver will be doing that approval. What will be the last thing?
If it is approved, it goes to the customer.
Correct. Send to the customer. Okay. So now these are the basic steps. Now, as you are creating these steps, you will realize that there could be a simple thing that the approval says this is not correct. It's not approved. Right? Is that possible?
Yes, it's possible.
So then what will happen in that case?
Review it again and make the changes.
Correct.
The rejection.
So
As per the feedback. Yeah.
correct. So if the proposal or the pricing part is not approved, it goes back to the creator who modifies it and sends it back. Okay. Now, what else do you think can be the variation in this process? How many of you are familiar with these kind of approval processes? What happens there?
Multi-level
Now,
approval.
correct. So if we just go by the simplicity of this process or what the customer is saying, we'll say, okay, there could be one variation saying the pricing is not approved, then it goes back, he or she corrects it, sends it back, then it gets approved, then sent to customer. But then there is something called multi-level approval. And if you're familiar with multi-level approval, there could be huge possibilities in multi-level approvals. Okay, what do you think can be multi-level approvals? What are the different ways? One, it needed to be approved by two people. That's an example of multi-level approval. What else is possible?
The price factor comes into picture when a multi-layer approval is used. Like up to a certain price, only one person can approve, and then it has to go to his senior for the approval.
Correct. Correct. So we have just now discussed two different variations. One where this is approved by two people. Other variation could be based on the price or the value of the proposal, or it could be a mixture of both. So now that makes it three variations. Now, how will you come to know about this? Which one is applicable in this case?
You observe how it is being done, right? You're trying to develop a system, but it is already happening in the organization today. So you actually do a floor observation, which is also called a Gemba walk, to see
Correct.
how it works.
That is one way of doing things. Correct. What else can you? You create the process diagram and take it to the customer to show that this is how I have understood it. And that is where you can ask questions about, is this how it works, or there is a different way of doing it. So there is a concept of open-ended question and close-ended question. Correct. In the interview, or it could be a workshop. It doesn't matter. It could be a couple of people from that department, or it could be a single person. What you're doing is you are creating right questions to help customer answer the details, because stakeholders are not familiar as to what we want, to what extent they need to explain it. They are not trying to avoid anything. It's just that they don't know what is the level of detailing you are looking for. In many cases, customers don't tell you exceptions because there's an exception. So they feel that exceptions are okay, they can be handled anyways. Something like this is a common thinking process of customers. So second way of doing things is to take the process diagram just like you did in prototype and ask the questions about where you think should you be focusing on. Okay. Now I chose this example, that is because I had this particular company where I guided them in developing the system requirements. This company had a very different set of approval mechanisms. So it was not multi-level, but it was something which was something very completely based on value of the proposition. So I'm not sure whether you can see it, but let me expand. So I'll just show you the part which is, so this is Visio, by the way, just to tell you, this is the tool which is Visio, in which you create process diagrams. Here, the proposal was approved based on, if the value of the proposal was less than $100,000, it was sent to the senior manager for approval. If it was more than 100,000 but less than 150,000, it was sent to the CFO for approval. And if it was more than 150,000, it was sent to the CEO for approval. And I have not shown because it was getting a little more cluttered. Later on, as the requirements were getting gathered, they said, okay, let's combine this, that if it is less than 150,000 but more than 100,000, first the senior manager will approve, then the CFO will approve. And in this case, 3 levels of approval. This is very, very specific to a particular organization, but that is always the case, right? Requirements always are dependent on individual customers. So process modeling is another important technique which is easy to understand. Why prototyping and process modeling work, or any visual model work? Because it's easier for even customers to understand and make sense. If you try and explain it in textual format, it's very difficult for customer to comprehend and then correct. Okay, but if you are able to create these kind of models, it helps a great deal in fixing all the inconsistencies or missing requirements in the requirements. Okay, so process modeling uh, can be done, or the process model can be created any format. You can create a flow chart, you can create activity diagrams, you can create BPM based process diagrams, and tool wise you can use Visio, this is draw.io. There are many tools for creating process diagrams. Even PowerPoint can be used to create flowcharts. Okay, so a recap. Every customer and project is different, even though the theme of the requirement is the same. Very evident, all of you are going to be customer, or you are customers of different banks. I use bank A, all of you might be using some other banks. And if you happen to be using two banks, you will see that the way the same thing is implemented is very different. Look at Amazon, look at any other e-commerce website. They're all different in the way they do the same, which means one requirement can be done or can be addressed in multiple ways. As a business analyst, we must try and figure out all the possible ways and then use analysis, maybe estimation, maybe the complexity factors, to determine which is the best way for the customer. That can only happen if you create a visual model and take it to the customer. The most popular visual models for requirements, use case, process modeling, and okay. So this is all I wanted to share. Any questions? I think there are a lot of questions here. Let me check. Okay. So Tina is saying immediate feedback in Agile. That was on the process modeling, I think. Yeah. So the use of visual modeling techniques in requirement stage is nothing to do with Agile or waterfall. Right? Today, I was not talking about Agile or waterfall. I was simply saying whether it's one single requirement, because we picked up requirements which are very small. Right? So essentially what we are saying is this requirement could be just one user story, which is going to be done in one sprint, right? It does not matter. Ultimately, as a business analyst or as a product owner, what you have to do, you have to make sure that you understand the requirements in the most accurate. That's the focus with which we did this webinar, right? So it does not matter. As long as you are conducting business analysis activities and capturing requirements, you should be working on making sure that requirements are accurately captured. Yes, in fact, we keep on doing these webinars. Every week there is a webinar, and yeah, of course, on this particular topic also we'll be doing. No. So Shadab has a question. What is your definition of requirements? Okay. So since this is an interesting question, tell me, can somebody tell me what is requirements? And what is the difference between needs and requirements? Anybody want to take a guess?
So requirements are basically nothing but a problem which a customer has and he's looking for solution. That is what I can think of why requirements are there. Something, a business problem which needs to be solved.
Okay. There's one more definition. Paul is saying requirement is the usable representation of a need. That is correct. Uh, Diksha is also saying presentable form of need. Correct. Shadab is saying need is an opportunity problem business try to solve. Correct. Need basically represents the problem or the opportunity which the business is trying to solve. Why? Because there is a value and the benefit involved. Okay. But needs is in a very high level format. To be able to address that need, we need to have more details on the need. That detailed view or the usable view of the need is called as a requirement. Okay, so even requirements. So you start with the business needs or the business requirement. This is a kind of a format of high level requirement, which then gets converted into a solution set of requirements. So requirements also take different forms as we discussed earlier. So there is a business requirement, which is the requirements defined from the needs in the language of the business. This is an example of business. Okay, what is the stakeholder requirement for this same? That is where you created the use case. So stakeholder will say that okay, I create the proposals in this way. So I first create it, then I send it to the approver. Then approver has a problem. They get back to us. We modify it or correct it and then send it. That's the stakeholder version of business requirements. Then you go to the system of solution requirements by creating the prototype. Okay, so the requirements actually start by expanding the needs into more detailed format, and then you take it further so that it becomes system or solution. Yes, we are talking about the Babok terms. Yes. So Rupa had a question on, is the solution requirement and design the same? These are the terms which are used in Babok. Okay, so IIBA has kind of changed the terms a bit. So solution requirement is something which is the requirements of the solution. How will the requirements be addressed in the solution? So a screen design is a solution requirement or a requirement format of the solution, which is similar thing as design. But in general terms, design means a lot of things, right? Design means screen design, design means technical design, so many things. Okay, so Babok has a slightly different meaning from the actual meaning of certain terms. So all these recordings, Tina, they are copied or they are uploaded on YouTube in a few days' time. So I think this event is live on YouTube also right now. So YouTube will make it available in next 24 hours. They automatically capture it and then make it available in 24 hours. Yes, Rupa. Not all business analysts are technical, so they don't do that. They do the technical design, as you rightly mentioned. It is typically done by technical architects and solutions architects. It's not the job of the business analyst to design the technical aspects of the software.
Okay, so where do you stop, Ars? I mean, being a BA, where do I see myself? Like, so there sometimes I hold myself. Oh no, this is where I need to hold because I don't know technically so much. So where do you think that thin line to hold myself there, or hold, or that to overcome that fear of being the best BA, or being contributing my best in that front?
Yeah, so see, as a BA, the fundamental and underlying principle which we should always consider is that our value or a business analyst value is more in terms of making sure that the business gets the value which they are looking at. Okay, that is not achieved by technology alone. Technology is just a means to achieve the end result, isn't it? Because a
Yes.
problem is about a business, either because of which they are seeing the downgrade in the revenue, or they are not able to grow as fast as they should be. Then in that case, what would you do? You're trying to figure out a solution which can address that problem. It could be anything. It could be a technical solution or non-technical. Okay. As a BA, you are only focusing on finding the best possible solution, which then is given to the technical team to implement. You are stopping yourself just before the implementation. So implementation will creating table design, writing programs. That's the implementation. So you stop yourself just before.
So basically, BA don't have to drive technicalities. We just have to drive the requirements and the solutions around it without much technical involvement.
Correct. You're right.
Okay, thank
So
you.
how a solution architect and BA is getting differentiated?
That is how they're differentiated, right? So when you stop, the technical architect starts.
No, I'm not talking about somebody who's a TA, somebody who's a solution architect, somebody who's working on the RFP or those kind of things, and a business analyst, how they getting differs.
RF, okay. See, if you look at the cycle of life cycle of a project, okay, not of software development. So what happens is there's an organization, then there is a vendor. Okay, so customer has a problem and they want a solution. Now, have they hired a vendor yet? No. So what they're going to do is they say either they float a tender or they ask certain vendors which are already shortlisted by them to give them a proposal. So the organization may issue an RFP or a tender. The vendor and the vendor's team, which is known as pre-sales, will create a proposal and send it to address what is required in RFP or to meet the terms of the RFP. Then there will be negotiations, meetings, and whatnot. Then the project will be awarded to a vendor. Vendor is the IT company. And then the software development starts. This is what you are talking about RFP. It happens before the project is awarded to an IT firm. You got it?
Yes, I got it.
Okay, so there are two other questions. How often is BA expected to come with the data flow diagram? See, nowadays entity relationship and data flow diagrams are not used. But I mean, it is just a type of diagram which is not used. But as I mentioned, use case diagrams, user stories, user story maps, process diagrams, prototypes, these are frequently used. So how often? 99.99% cases. You have to create visual models. Not necessarily data flow diagrams and ER diagrams, but visual models is mandatory or is critical to success of capturing requirements correct. That was the topic of the webinar. Devyani, this is for your question.
Thank you.
Anjali has a question, sir. Can you explain what all those use case workflows? So this is what we are trying to do, right? So the example which I gave you in this case, this is what we are trying to do. We create with you create the use cases. We capture the right process diagram wherever the process diagram was basically to capture all the missing steps, incorrect steps. Once you have finalized the processes or process steps, then the next step is to create prototypes. How will you create? You go step by step. Look at the create proposal. How will you create the proposal? That's where one prototype, one screen design will come, or two screens will come, depending on how many steps proposal creation takes. Then, how the submission happens by just clicking a button or some other mechanics. These are the places where you create the prototype. So, from capturing business requirements or understanding the needs, you go to the use case diagrams, then you go to the process diagram. From the process diagrams, you create the prototypes. And from the prototypes, you create the data model. And then you capture all of this together into one document. If it's a waterfall methodology, you will create the requirement specification or SRS document. If it's an agile, you will create whatever is recommended by the team, agile team. Do you want to create a user story document, or you don't want to do anything? Just keep the prototypes, process diagrams as separate documents and put it together in some kind of reference. Okay, so that's how the process flow happens. Is this a 2B flow? Yeah, so see, 2B and as if is essentially saying that currently the process is like this. Okay, this is how we do it, but we want to improve it. But that is not always the case. See, as is and 2B are kind of thrown out in the industry like these are the buzzwords. But if you just want to automate a process as it is, then there will be only one process, right? No improvement.
Okay, sir.
But
so are you?
Just
Sorry,
one.
let me finish first, sir.
Give me one.
Yeah. Go for it.
But if there is a scope for improvement, or customer wants to improve it, or there is a problem with the current process, then what will you do? You will analyze the process. So there is something called process analysis, which will lead to identifying where is the problem, and then we create something called to be process, which is the updated version of the as is. Yes, please go ahead.
Okay. No, I understand. So what you're saying is, sometimes the businesses just automate the as is flow as it is. But sometimes if there is a room for improvement, they apply some process analysis and come up with a 2B flow and then automate that process, basically. Okay, that's good. Yeah.
Marin has a question: is in-depth requirements required before the project starts? Will a high-level no. So the level of detailing has nothing to do with agile or waterfall. You need the similar kind of detail for the programmer or the technical architects to take it forward. The difference in agile and waterfall is not about the level of detailing. The difference is how many requirements you start and how many times the customer gets involved in the process of software. So don't equate agile with less amount of detailing and waterfall with high level of detail. That is not correct. The requirement detailing has to be same. How will it change if a programmer in .NET is writing a program of login screen in agile versus what? He still needs the same kind of details, right? The documentation may be different. The formality of the documentation may be different, but the level of detailing has to be the same, isn't it?
Sir, I have a question.
Yes, go ahead.
Stakeholder requirements are basically what each stakeholder wants from the system, right?
Yes.
Okay.
So it's basically an individual's version of what do they want.
Okay.
So basically what we are saying is business requirements are basically now getting detailed out in the form of individual stakeholders.
Right. Thank you, sir.
Yeah. Yes, Tina, I'll try to do that. The process modeling, maybe we can have a webinar on process modeling. Yes, that's a good idea. We'll do that. Thanks, Devyani. Thanks, Shadab. So I guess there are no more questions. So we have a page on, anyway, on LinkedIn. Team does give all the, whenever there is a webinar. Some of our webinars are now conducted by IIB also. There's one on 19, but that is more for CBAP, not for ECBA. That is hosted by IIB. So keep looking for LinkedIn page on Techcanvass. You'll get all the notifications. All right. Thank you, everyone. We'll possibly meet soon with the next level of webinar in the same series.
Thank you, sir.
And see you. Bye-bye.